The Journeyman Chapter 10. The sun was shining bravely, and the warmth of midday rested on the blighted land when Jared came around the corner of the house to Jeanette. She was sitting on the doorstone, holding her head high. Her eyes were dry, and except for the paleness to her face, there was no sign of her sorrow. But there was something about her which made her like one who has looked deeply into life. Jared sat down on the grass in front of her. "Jeanette," he said quietly, "Corbin left a note for you. It says the house is yours." Her eyes widened in surprise. "No one can dispute it," Jared went on, "for it's signed like a deed in its own right." Jeanette was silent for a long time. Then he spoke slowly. That was kind of him. Her voice was as soft as the flowing of water over stones. She looked up at Jared earnestly. "But Corbin has stock. What is to be done with them? How can I feed them through this winter?" Jared shook his head sadly. "They'll have to be sold, Jeanette, all but one or two, and we'll have to work hard and fast to harvest feed enough for those two this winter." "We'll work together," she said, smiling at him, "as we used to in the old days when we were brother and sister. But what shall we have for ourselves to eat?" "I've a secret, Jeanette." He leaned closer to her as if to keep his words from even the wind. "I've wanted to share it with you this long time." He told her of the corn he had planted in the clearing. "And it's got ears on it now, as golden as a king's ransom." She clapped her hands as he spoke. Then her face looked troubled. "But last night, have you seen it since the storm?" He shook his head. "I'm wanting to go there now." She rose quickly from the doorstone and followed him to the barn, where they found scythes and baskets. If the storm had laid low the corn and the frost had withered it, the sooner it was cut the better. When they reached the clearing, Jeanette shouted as she saw the tall stalks flapping in the breeze, but their green was edged with brown. "The frost has lain here too," Jared said, "but not the wind or the hail." He looked around at the forest enclosing them. "Oh, goodly trees, how well you have sheltered my corn." He moved in and out among the tall stalks, feeling the ears for their soundness and turning back the shucks here and there to see the kernels just full in the milk. He came back to stand beside Jeanette, and Jeanette thought that at the moment she had never seen such a light as was shining in his thin face. "There's food here for many," Jared said almost reverently, "and what's even more than food, seed for next year's sowing. But we must lose no time in harvesting it, for the rot of the frost will soon start its work." They took a basket and moved through the corn, plucking off the ears with their dried tassels and heavy weight of kernels, emptying the basket time after time until they had a great pile at one side of the field. When all the ears had been gathered in, Jared took the scythe and started cutting the stalks, while Jeanette followed him, picking them up and binding them into bundles. Jared laughed aloud. "Here's food for the gray one, and the brindled cow, and perhaps a pair of sheep." "Oh!" Suddenly Jeanette gave a small gasp. "Food! I'm so hungry. Jared, is it wicked of me to always be so hungry?" "Jeanette, shall we leave the work and go back to the house?" He dropped his scythe and came to stand beside her. She shook her head and smiled at him. "No, you stay with the work. I'll go down to my house and fetch something back for us to eat." "That's good," he said with a nod, "for if I can keep cutting, we'll have the clearing done by nightfall. Then, come wind, come weather." Fleet as a cloud before the wind, Jeanette was off down the path through the woods. Jared watched her go, then bent to his task with a lightness at his heart that made him want to shout for joy as he saw the corn yield its tall weight to his scythe. Corbin Christie had ridden through the village at such a pace that he had scarcely seen the group of men gathered outside True's Inn. But they had seen him, and they knew without a question who it was, for there was no horse so powerful in all the countryside as young Meteor, and no rider so reckless as Corbin Christie. "Whither bound?" Ephraim Twist called to him. Corbin reined in young Meteor long enough to shout, "West! I'm through with this land, and—" But the stallion plunged at such a sudden check to his speed, and Corbin's words were lost. "He's riding as if the devil himself were at his heels," one man said. The crowd echoed his words until Ephraim Twist swore that he saw the devil trailing a ball of fire at young Meteor's hooves. People were sure superstitious. "What did he look like?" someone cried out. "Look like," Twist bellowed. "None other than that painter fellow with his skinny body." So a roar went up from the crowd and a demand for retribution on the painter fellow. It was not the frosts alone and the blighted land that the men laid to his account. A dozen recriminations were piled against his name. That means like accusations of some fault. It mattered nothing to them that the calamities of the year were widespread in their community, and the brunt of the blame was fixed upon Jared Austin. The men moved into the inn that Dan True watched them warily. Ephraim Twist raised his mug and drained it. "Did you hear what Christy said? That he was through with the land and the painter too?" "Aye, we did," a husky voice answered. "The house has been bedeviled, sure enough, and a man like Corbin Christie will stay in it no longer." "Perhaps that painter's a witch," Twist muttered. "And we know what should be done with witches." "Aye, that we do." The voice rose in wrath until Dan True sought to restrain them by speaking a word for Jared. "So he's bewitched you too?" Twist screamed shrilly. True leveled his eyes at Twist, then swept the crowd with his scathing glance. "Not a drop or crust will any one of you have again under my roof until you stop this madness," he said. "You've all had too much as it is." Taking his keys from his pocket, he rattled them before their faces, as if to show the men that he could keep his word. "Come, men, the day's getting on," Twist shouted. "Shall we make the devil pay for his deeds or not?" "Make him pay!" they roared in answer. "Burn him with all his fiendish wall writings!" Taking up whatever implements they had or grabbing whatever was within their reach in the yard of the inn, shovels, axes, pitchforks, the men formed into a body behind Ephraim Twist and started up the road that led to Corbin Christie's house. Anger made them sullen, and the lust for vengeance gave a heavy rhythmic stride to their booted feet. Eliza Dunkley saw them when 2 hours later they passed her place, a strange band of men with a strange assortments of implements, treading the dusty road with grim deliberateness. She wondered what harvest they were bound to gather, and thought to call out to them, but a dread came into her heart at the unkempt, ragged appearance of the men. When she saw who their leader was, and knew him for a man no honest farmer would trust, she called Tobit to her, and bade him watch the babe in its cradle, while she went to the fields behind the house to summon Reuben and alight from their work. Janet Thaxter saw the strange body of men just as she came out of the woods and was running across the meadow to the house. She stopped for a moment, and wondering where they were bound, for there was something about their black silence and the dull thud of their feet that spelled evil. Then horror knocked within her, stilling the gnawing of hunger at her ribs, as she saw the body of men turn into the road that led up to her house. She tried to shout to them, but the breath was trapped within her. Then the wit that was her fiber moved her feet. Deftly, she veered from the path and darted across the short space of meadow into the barn and through it to the house, reaching the front door a moment or two before the men. She pushed one hand through her hair to tighten its disorder and laid the other on her heart to still its wild beating. For one perilous moment, her eyes sped around the entryway, with its stencils, the little bells waiting to ring, the pineapples offering hospitality. Then she threw the door wide open and stepped boldly out across the threshold. "Good day, gentlemen," she said. "Mr. Christie is not at home, but perhaps you'll tell your business to me." Ephraim Twist moved forward, and the men broke their rank and swarmed around the doorstone. "It's not Corbin Christie we want, but the painter fellow that's been living here." "Oh, Jeanette began. Then the crowd began roaring, "Devil! Witch!" And through their briny oaths, Jeanette caught the words, "Burn the house down, and him within it!" "Quiet, men," Twist roared. He turned to Jeanette. "This house is no place for a woman now. We have work to do here, and you'd best be leaving. But before you go, tell us where the fellow is." A man on the edge of the crowd raised his axe and swung it around his head, then hurled it through the air to sink deep into one of the doorposts. Another had gone into the house by the back way and brought coals from the hearth to kindle outside. "Stop!" Jeanette cried in a voice so imperative that every man instinctively moved back a pace. "Put out that fire, Ephraim Twist." And Twist, almost without knowing that he was obeying her, stamped on the coals and cuffed the man who'd been kindling them. "Let not one of you lay a finger on my house," Jeanette said, tossing her head as if to challenge them to something they dared not do. "Your house?" Twist asked. "My house," Jeanette replied. "As much mine as if James Madison himself had given it to me. There's a deed in my name, signed and secure." Jeanette ripped the axe out of the doorpost and flung it over the heads of the crowd, so low that a dozen men ducked and bit their lips in fear. The axe landed with a thud on the earth. The men backed away from the door, all but Ephraim Twist, who stood adamant. "We'll spare the house, but not that devil with a painter's kit. Tell us his whereabouts, and we'll leave." "You must think I know much to tell you the way an itinerant takes," she said. "He was here this morning. I saw him," a man shouted from the crowd. "He's hiding in the woods, I'll warrant. Come on, men, let's set a fire to the woods, and let the devil perish in his own element." Jeanette laughed at them. "The fire will spread to your own woods." But the threat had little effect on the men who were already moving away from the house. "Men," she called, "he'll be back here in 3 days' time. Can't you wait till then?" They hesitated and murmured together. "Yes," someone shouted out from the back of the crowd. "Yes," they all shouted in chorus. For the satisfaction of burning woodland was as nothing to wreaking vengeance on the man himself. "Ephraim Twist," Jeanette turned to him. "This is a free country, and if Jared Austin gives himself up to you, you must try him fairly in the meeting house 3 days from now." Ephraim nodded, confused by a wit that ran ahead of his rage. He was compelled to admit that the girl was right. There was a heavy case against the painter fellow, but he had a right to a free trial. "Summon your justice of the peace and have your witnesses at hand," Jeanette said inexorably. "Who would that be, men?" Twist called to his crowd. "Why, Randall Eveleth." The bearded man shouted back. 3 days from today, then, in the meeting house," Twist muttered. "And it's a dozen men against the painter to 1 for him." "Let him defend himself when the time comes," Jeanette said shortly. "And let the decision be with Mr. Eveleth. Is that agreed?" "Agreed," Twist echoed. Slowly, sulkily, Ephraim Twist turned and started away, with his men following him. Jeanette watched them go down the road until they were out of sight. Jared, at work in the clearing, scything and bundling and standing the corn stalks, realized that darkness was almost upon him and that Jeanette had not yet returned. She'd had more than enough time to collect food and bring it back. Thinking that something had kept her from returning, he put his scythe over his shoulder and started down through the woods. On the edge of the meadow he met Jeanette. Her face was pale and her eyes were the eyes of one who'd been kindling sparks, but her step was firm. She carried a basket over her arm. "Jeanette," he cried to her, "is all well?" She came running to him. "Don't leave the woods, Jared," she said quickly, pushing him back into the shadow of the trees. "Jeanette, what?" he began. "Hush," she said. "Don't talk. Let us eat what I have in the basket, and then go back for the corn." She drew him down beside her at the base of the tree and started to divide the scant meal. They ate hungrily. Suddenly, Jeanette asked, "How long will it take us to husk the corn and stow it in the granary?" "Perhaps a week," he said, "if we work at it steadily." "Could we do it in 3 days if we worked very hard?" He nodded. "Perhaps, but there is no hurry now, Jeanette. No harm can come to the corn, and there's grain enough for all the village to share, with seed for the spring sowing. Frost can't harm it now, but the wrath of man can. Oh, Jared, she looked up at him. Then she told him of the men who had stormed the house. They promised a trial in 3 days' time, but Jared, my darling, there's a dozen of them to speak against you, and who's to speak for you? They'll drown out the Dunkleys' words, and when they're as crazed as they are, they'll imagine 1,000 things against you. I've heard too many tales from years ago of houses burned and men and women destroyed by the madness of their own people. Jared looked at her. He had heard only 2 words of all her talk. He smiled at her, a smile that gave to his face the beauty he saw so readily in all things. She stared at him. Jared Austen, you'd think I brought you good news. You have, Jeanette. She shook her head slowly. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. You called me your darling. Then Jeanette smiled and flung her arms around him. Oh, Jared, what a crazed lass I was to get promised to anyone but you. Do you know what get promised means?
No.
Get engaged. I asked you when we were children if you would marry me, he reminded her. You never said yes, and I never believed you meant no, but you did say you would marry a man who had 100 acres in his own name. Jeanette bowed her head in shame, and Jared lifted it tenderly. I'm that man now, for Corbin's left the farm to me. Then he laughed. But I'm no farmer. She looked hard at him. His face was a white blur in the night about them, but she saw its light, a light that she knew would shine for her all the days of her life. You're the only man in all this countryside who has made corn grow this year. She sighed deeply. She was tired, and hunger still gnawed at her, but the comfort of his arms around her was strength and assurance and peace. Who will speak for you, Jared, at the trial? She asked after a few moments. The corn will speak for me, he said quietly, and it has a tongue that hungry men will understand. They parted then in the woods, Jeanette to return to the Dunkleys, and Jared to seek the shelter he had made earlier in the summer at the clearing. For the next 3 days they worked together from dawn till dusk, husking the corn. At night, Jared loaded panniers on the gray one's back and brought the corn down to the granary in the barn. It was hard work. Backs were bent nearly double in weariness, and fingers grew calloused from pulling the husks. But there was laughter and talk between them, and plans for the future, and a kiss now and then over a bushel of golden corn. And hunger is less querulous for the promise that day, querulous? For the promise that lay in the flowing bins of the granary. Ephraim Twiss got word to Randall Eveleth, she announced one morning, and he's promised to be at the meeting house at 4 tomorrow afternoon. Everyone is excited, Jared. They're coming from miles around to the trial. Men like a spectacle, no matter what it is, Jared said. One day Mr. Topham and I arrived in a city where there was to be a hanging the next morning. There was great excitement, and the crowd of spectators gathered to witness it. Grew with the hours, but the poor sinner hung himself in his cell, and the disappointment of the crowd was terrible to see. You could go away, Jared, she reminded him. But I won't, he told her. I've never disappointed anyone, and I don't intend to now. There's snow on the mountains, Jared, and winter will be on the minds of many in that courtroom. He did not seem worried. I'm not surprised, for the nights have been cold. The geese are migrating already. Have you seen them? Early this morning I saw some on their way south. The leaves are falling quickly, she added wistfully. After we're married, Jeanette, and before the snow lies deep, we'll go over the mountains to see your mother and father. And I have walls to do there for Nancy Austen. There'll be more and more people wanting you to do their walls, she said proudly. But you'll have to keep some time for your land. I will, he said with a nod. Then he went on. When Squire Talent told me a man had to be something of a farmer to survive, I didn't know what he meant, but I do now. Oh, Jeanette. His eyes flashed with happiness. A fine thing it will be to itinerate during the winter and work with the land the rest of the year. They went on with their husking in silence for a while. What news is there of the harvest elsewhere? Jared asked her suddenly. She shook her head. Little enough but loss. Last night John came in with a tale of a farmer farther north, who is harvesting some corn and has promised to sell it to the people for $5 silver a peck. Do you know what a peck is?
No.
It's an amount of crops, like a bushel, and a peck.
Bushel.
Jared let out an exclamation. Who can pay that for long? What will you ask for your corn, Jared? He shook his head. Not 1 penny for a bushel, nor a name on a slip of paper either, but the proof that whoever asks for corn has need of it. She took his hand between hers and held it to her heart. It will be like coming to Egypt, and folks will say about you as Joseph did to his brothers. God did send me before you to preserve life. Jared laughed. That will be after they're persuaded I'm not a witch. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, when the corn was all harvested, and they stood in the empty clearing with only the bundles of stalks about them, Jared took Jeanette into his arms and kissed her. This is the last time I shall kiss you, he said tenderly. The last time? She queried anxiously, clinging to him. For never once during the 3 days had Jared shown fear for the trial's outcome. Yes, the last time as a maid. The next time it will be as my betrothed. She made no answer, for the clasp of her arms about him said more than many words. But the time was short, and even love must wait on justice. Jared glanced up at the sun. "'Tis time I was starting," he said. "And I'll soon follow," she promised. "I'll choose the most golden of all the ears and put them in a bag to bring with me to the meeting house." Jared left her then, with the gray one standing near for her to ride down to the village. He went through the woods to wash at the brook and tidy himself after his work. Soon he was walking down the road and stopping at the Dunkleys on the way. Eliza met him at the door. She was ready for the trial, dressed in her Sunday best. There was sympathy in her eyes and concern in her face. "Jeanette has a dress here, Eliza, that she brought with her from over the mountain," he began. "'Tis her wedding dress," Eliza said sadly, "and it looks now as if she may never wear it." "See that she wears it today," Jared said, and then was off down the road with his easy stride. Jared walked into the meeting house as the clock was striking 4. Randall Eveleth, the justice of the peace, was already in his place. He bowed to Jared, who took a seat beside him. The men that Ephraim Twist had gathered began coming in. One by one they filed into their seats, and on their faces were written bitterness and anger, dulled by waiting. Their womenfolk walked behind them silently. Then the curious flocked in until the room seemed hardly large enough to hold all who would be present. Near to where Jared sat, those who would speak for him arranged themselves. Dan True and the whole Dunkley family, down to the 5-month-old babe. Jeanette was not there. Order was called, and Randall Eveleth stood up before the crowded meeting house. "Who brings a charge against Jared Austin?" he asked in the cool tone of impartiality. "I do." Ephraim Twist rose from his seat. "We all do," the men sitting near him said. "What is it?" Witchcraft. Proved and double proved," Twist said, and then began the grim tale of the summer when all hope of any harvest had been frozen to death. He left out nothing, and the frost and the storms, the crops and ruined lands were attributed to Jared. When he had finished, Mr. Eveleth said quietly, "I have heard reports about weather like this in many parts of the world, England, Ireland, and France. These conditions have been widespread. There must be further proof that the accused is as you say. Who's next?" The bearded man arose, and with an oath brought forth his assertion that Jared Austin had bewitched his wife, for on the days when she would churn, a woodchuck never failed to sit on her doorstone, and the butter always failed to come. A murmur of incredulity ran through the group of onlookers. "You believe that Jared Austin was the woodchuck?" Mr. Eveleth asked, his eyebrows raised. "Aye, that I do." The bearded man sat down and looked at Ephraim Twist. "So they're saying that Jared is a witch, and that he turned into a woodchuck and sat there, and when he did, the cream wouldn't turn into butter for his wife." Does that make any sense?
No.
Another man rose and swore to passing Jared on the road one day, and upon reaching his barnyard, finding a litter of young shoats dancing on their hind legs, going to the pump for water to pour on the bewitched animals, he found that no water would come, and going to the hearth for a hot poker, he found no fire there. And the listening crowd stirred, and Jared caught frowns of puzzlement on the faces of the men who he knew to be honest farmers. Mr. Eveleth heard them all. Some had much to say and some had little. Some swore that they had even seen Jared in conversation with the devil, and some that the horse he rode was one of the devil's shapes. Some referred to his stenciling as devilish writings that bewitched a house into doing his will, and some made mock of his lean body that felt neither cold nor hunger. After each one, Mr. Eveleth gave a sober nod of dismissal. Finally, he turned to those who would speak for Jared. Dan True rose first. The Hebrews had a scapegoat they laid their sins upon. Today these men are trying to make Jared Austin accountable for their misfortunes. But he is a good man, and though disaster has come near us, I take my Bible oath that he's had naught to do with the devil. John Duncley stood up and in a husky voice said, Jared Austin's my friend, and I'll call heaven to record that the good he does is from God. I've a fine heifer running in my fields this day that would not be here were it not for the care Jared Austin gave when it was stillborn. Then there was an angry murmur among the men grouped near Ephraim Twiss when John Duncley mentioned the heifer. Eliza Duncley rose and told how, when she was alone in the house and her time had come, Jared Austin had helped her babe into the world. Mr. Eveleth nodded gravely. Jared Austin, he said, facing the defendant, you have heard the voices of these accusers. Have you aught to say for yourself? Not in my own words, sir, but with your permission, I'll ask the psalmist to speak for me. Mr. Eveleth agreed, and Jared moved over to where the Bible, used on Sundays, lay open on the lectern. He turned the pages to find his place, then read the words slowly, cherishing each one before he sent it forth. As he read, there were those whose lips trembled, and those whose eyes grew moist, but there was not one who dared murmur against him. Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. Truth shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven. He paused, fixed his eyes on Ephraim Twiss, and then continued, Yea, the Lord shall give that which is good, and our land shall yield her increase. Righteousness shall go before him, and shall set us in the way of his steps. Jared sat down quietly, his face pale and his long, thin fingers trembling. He looked toward the Duncleys, wondering what had kept Jeanette from being with them. Then he looked toward the door, longing for her presence. Mr. Eveleth's cool glance went around the room. Will anyone else speak for the accused? There was a stir at the entryway of the meeting house. The door opened, and Jeanette Thaxter, in a sky-blue dress, adorned with her own embroidery, came in. Her hair lay smooth with satin shiny on her shoulders. Her face was wreathed in a smile like the face of a bride. With a quick, firm step, she came down the aisle, bending only a little under the half-filled bag slung over her shoulder. Sir, I have this to say, she said, placing the bag on the floor. Opening it, she reached inside and took out a golden ear of corn. She held it high above her head, then let it fall back into the bag again. There was a gasp among the people gathered in the meeting house, as of a crowd thirsting in a desert land and seeing water at last. Whose corn have you there? Mr. Eveleth asked. Jared Austin's, sir. He grew it this summer in a clearing too high for the frosts to reach, sheltered for the winds to batter, and he grew it that all his neighbors might have meal in the winter and seed in the spring. There was a proud glory in her face as she spoke, and on the lips of her mind were the words, and the man who grew his corn is soon to be my wedded husband. Mr. Eveleth reached into the bag to touch the corn for himself. He looked at it as a man might look at newly mined gold. Then he faced the people solemnly. The man who grew that corn in this starvation year is a Christian. There was silence in the crowded room. Mr. Eveleth turned to Ephraim Twiss. Have you anything further to say? Ephraim Twiss shook his head dully, and his hard-lined face, shamed, was already... And in his hard-lined face, shame was already erasing the marks of anger. Mr. Eveleth turned to Jared. Not guilty, he said. Then he looked at Twiss again. And you, Ephraim Twiss, must pay the cost of the trial. Ephraim Twiss slowly nodded his head and slowly rose and walked down the aisle, followed by the other men. Soon there was no one left in the meeting house but Dan True and the Dunkley family and Mr. Eveleth standing beside Jared and Jeanette with a bag of corn between them. Jared shook Jeanette's hand in his and looked up at Mr. Eveleth. Sir, would you be so kind to pronounce us betrothed, for that's what we're wanting to be. Mr. Eveleth smiled and made the pronouncement, adding, and what's more, I'll come this way a fortnight hence to bind the bonds of matrimony for you. Do you know what that means?
Have you get married?
Eliza Dunkley let out a cry of joy and came forward to kiss Jeanette and take Jared's hand in hers. Oh, Jared, so Jeanette is the one, and I never knew. She sobbed in her joy. It was you, Eliza, who bade me claim the thing I love, Jared said softly. Don't you remember? That April night was not so long ago. A full moon bent low in the sky, and its mellow light tipped the spears of frost on the grass as Jared and Jeanette stepped over the threshold of their house. Jared looked at the stencils he had drawn with such care on the walls. The little hearts had been hung for him and Jeanette after all, and the little bells had been waiting to ring for them. Jeanette smiled up at him, though the night air made a shiver run over her. Beauty is a bright flame, Jared, she said. And a warm one, too, he cried, catching her in his arms.